Film begins with a wide-angle image far above the tree line of a lush, verdant rainforest. A series of photos of Jake Sully, a disabled war veteran and former Marine, are intercut. He awakens on a massive spaceship en route to Pandora, a densely forested Earth-like moon orbiting Polyphemus, a massive blue planet similar to Jupiter. He is one of many travelers who have awakened after nearly 6 years of cryosleep en route to Pandora. The ship's crew tends to him as he drifts out of his sleeping pod in zero gravity. He opens his locker, which is labeled Sully. Jake tells us that he has a murdered twin brother, Tom, who was to be part of a high-level program controlled by corporate and military planners to research Pandora's environment and population. Because Jake and his brother are genetically identical, he was presented with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity: take over his brother's contract with a corporate military entity and travel light years away to a previously unseen world, Pandora. Recognizing the concepts of being free and a fresh start, Jake agrees to the deal as his brother's body is cremated. Jake is one of several military and civilians ready to land on Pandora, which is 4.3 light-years away from Earth. As Jake mulls over his new role, we see the base and its construction, as well as massive mining machines digging up the soil in a large quarry. The passengers are all advised to wear full-face breathing masks because the planet's atmosphere will not support human life. 20 seconds of exposure to the planet's deadly atmosphere produces unconsciousness, with death occurring 4 minutes later. While the other passengers disembark and take their first steps onto the base, known as Hell's Gate and surrounded by a massive perimeter fence, Jake follows them in his wheelchair, earning the nickname Meals on Wheels from a few haughty Marines. Through voiceover, he admits that he lost the use of his legs during one of his tours of duty on Earth, and that while a spinal injury like his can be repaired, it takes money, which is difficult to come by in the current economy. Jake visits a research lab and meets scientist Norm Spellman and Dr. Max Patel, 2 Avatar program members. We learn about the Avatar program as Jake gets his first sight at his own avatar. Humans are unable to breathe Pandora's air, but the Avatar program allows a human to interface with their own avatar, a genetically bred human-Navi hybrid, and function as if they were a Navi native. Jake will be able to walk and breathe in his virtual body once more. The avatars resemble their human drivers in appearance. When Norm tells Jake that his avatar looks like him, Jake replies solemnly, "It looks like my dead brother." Jake rushes to a military meeting where Colonel Miles Quaritch is addressing the assembled soldiers and a few civilians. He informs them that they are no longer in Kansas, and he tells them about Pandora's indigenous people, the Navi. Quaritch, who has a lot of scars on the side of his head, claims that they are hard to kill and that almost anything out there will try to kill you. And, while it is his responsibility to keep his people alive, he says he will not succeed, not with all of you. If they want to survive, he says, they must follow Pandora rules. Dr. Grace Augustine, the program's science lead, awakens in a specially built pod that links her to her avatar and flips open the lid just as Jake and Norm walk into the science department. Norm tells Jake that she enjoys plants better than people, and she emerges from her pod to chat with Norm and Navi. She turns to Jake after being satisfied with Norm's knowledge of the language. She tells him that she needs his brother Tom, the PhD who trained for the Pandora trip for 3 years, but she doesn't need Jake because Jake has no lab experience and has never been attached to an avatar. Jake attempts to indicate that he is a quick learner, but Grace is unimpressed. Grace storms out to the control room of the base to confront Parker Selfridge, the base commander and representative for the Resources Development Administration, a corporation that governs all military and civilian workers on the colony. He informs her that Jake will be her team's security escort while on the planet's surface. Grace informs Parker that she requires a researcher, not a jarhead dropout, and she doubts Jake will be useful in her botanical studies. Parker responds, stating that he disagrees and that they luck out with Jake. Because he is a perfect genetic match for his twin brother's avatar, they can use his military skills in an avatar body towards the overall goal of the operation, mining the mineral unobtainium, a potent source of energy that sells for many millions of dollars per kilo and can bring cheap power back to a dying Earth. Parker advises Grace that one method to help achieve this goal is to win the hearts and minds of the Navis and get their cooperation. Grace claims that the soldiers killed numerous Navi under the guise of Selfridge's operation. Jake and Norm are linked to their avatars for the first time the next morning at the lab. Jake, as his avatar, awakens in a different room with other avatars and employees. Within a few moments, Jake is making his handlers nervous because he is overjoyed with his ability to move his legs again and is attempting to walk for the first time since becoming a paraplegic. Human lab workers are powerless to stop him. A Navi is over 10 feet tall, often closer to 12, and far stronger than humans. A staff worker instructs him to stop and lie down after his long-tailed knocks down instruments. Jake dismisses him and storms out of the room into the sunlight. He finds himself in a leisure area where other avatars are playing sports and employees are conducting various chores while wearing protective gear. Jake meets Grace's avatar, who is more patient than human Grace, and accompany Jake to the barracks, where he is eventually encouraged to relax. Jake examines his neural queue, a long appendage that resembles a hair braid, before falling asleep. When the avatar falls asleep, the link is broken and Jake awakens. Later, Jake meets Trudy Chacon, a retired Marine pilot with whom he will spend several weeks familiarizing himself with his avatar and exploring Pandora. Jake will be the door gunner on her team. Jake meets with Colonel Quaritch, who is weightlifting. The colonel informs Jake that he has reviewed his military record and is impressed with what he accomplished on some of his tours, including one in Venezuela. The colonel warns Jake about the dangers that await him in Pandora. He also expresses his belief that the Avatar program is a joke, but it does provide an opportunity for a unique reconnaissance mission. If Jake can find out and tell the colonel what he wants to know about the natives, how to persuade them to move away from the unobtainium or deposits, and how to hit them hard if they don't, the colonel will make sure Jake gets the surgery he needs to regain use of his legs. The colonel puts on an amp suit, a bipedal exoskeleton used for missions on Pandora, and walks away. Jake, reconnected with his avatar, flies across Pandora's surface in Trudy's gunship alongside Grace, Norm, and others. The team lands in a wilderness where Grace and Norm begin collecting flora samples and taking measurements. Jake becomes distracted by his surroundings and stumbles into a field of helicaradian flowers, which grow quite tall and shrink when Jake touches them. A Titanothere, a massively armored hammerhead beast, confronts Jake. Grace tells him to stand his ground and not shoot, otherwise the animal would become enraged and charge. Guns have no effect on him because his armor is too thick. Jake is able to hold his ground only because another beast, a panther-like Venator, has approached him from behind, causing the Titanotheres to retreat and circle their young. The Venator then moves his gaze to Jake. Grace tells him to flee, and the Venator pursues him, separating Jake from his group. He loses his rifle and is taken down by the animal, but he is able to rescue himself by releasing his backpack. The chase eventually brings Jake to a waterfall, where he dives to safety, leaving the Venator howling above him. Jake's crew looks for him, but Trudy says they must return to base because night operations are not permitted. Grace claims he won't make it through the night. It's now night, and we observe Jake honing a long stick into a spear from above. The Navi shoots an arrow towards Jake and prepares to shoot when small, ethereal, glowing creatures descend on her bow. We later discover that these are very pure spirits, also known as the Seeds of Iwa. A pack of viper wolves is stalking Jake. He immerses the tip of his spear in a flammable pitch-like liquid. He fires the end and uses it as a torch against the viper wolves, who surround him with their teeth bared and jaws gnashing. The animals assault Jake. He fights back, killing some before being overpowered by others. The archer who had been watching Jake joins the fight on his side. She kills some viper wolves and drives the others away. She lovingly puts several sobbing, wounded animals out of their pain and prays for them. Jake tries to thank her for assisting him in repelling the intruders. She scorns his thanks and tells him that everything is his fault, that they did not have to die, and that he should go back to where he came from. Jake inquires as to whether she feels this way and why she assisted him. "You have a strong heart and no fear," she says, "but you're stupid." Jake seeks to follow his rescuer up into a tree, asks for her assistance, and expresses his want to learn. He is disgusted and instructed to go back because sky people cannot be trained. The Iwa seeds reappear and begin to land on the frightened Jake. He inquires as to what they are. "Very pure spirits," she responds, and Jake is engulfed in them, leaving an effect on his friend. When the seeds float away, she relents and invites him to accompany her. Jake gets hit by a Biolo thrown by an Omatakean warrior patrol as he tries to keep up with his rescuer, Neytiri. Sute, the next in line to the throne and the man Neytiri is intended to marry, is their leader. Sute orders his troops to bring him along to Tashik. Jake is introduced to Neytiri's parents, the king and queen of the tribe, Itukin and Emoat. Jake informs the elders that he is a warrior, a dreamwalker, and that he wishes to learn from them. Emoat pricks Jake's chest and tastes his blood, declaring that it is Iwa's desire for him to live with the Omaticea and for Neytiri, however reluctantly, to teach him their ways and customs. After a ritual gathering, Jake is led to his bed, a leaf high up in the home tree that encircles him like a cocoon. Human Jake awakens as he falls asleep. At morning chow, all of the scientists, including Grace, are listening intently to everything Jake says. Norm appears disappointed and depressed. He was Grace's first pick to bond with the Omaticea. Jake has won over the military and corporate representatives. Jake appears to be their best hope at getting the Omaticea to move or advising the colonel on how to force them to do so, because Home Tree sits on a vast deposit of unobtainium. He's given 3 months to complete his task before the bulldozers arrive. The next scenes focus upon Avatar Jake's training with Neytiri and Human Jake's reports on his adventures via the videolog he dictates at the end of each day's activity. He forms a kinship with his dire horse, a sacred animal, to the Navi. Jake will need to learn how to attach the animal and connect his neural cue to its antenna. Human Jake continues to report on the infrastructure of the home tree as well as various Navi information. Jake struggles to learn how to control his dire horse and is frequently referred to as Scound by Neytiri and Sute, which he explains means moron. Jake informs the colonel and Selfridge about the Omaticaeus home, the massive home tree. It has a significant amount of unobtainium beneath it. Jake explains the structure of the 1,000-foot-tall tree. Quaritch sees an opportunity to destroy the tree, but Jake insists on allowing him to talk with the Navi and persuade them to leave. Grace decides to relocate her mining operation to the Hallelujah Mountains, a remote region of immense, floating islands sacred to the Navi and rich in unobtainium. Grace wishes to to distance herself from the RDA officials and military personnel stationed at the base. Jake explains his language lessons in his next video log, comparing his time with the Navy to field stripping a weapon. With enough repetition, you can't help but learn it. This is intercut with scenes from his ongoing training with Neytiri, who educates him about the Navy Forest link. She tells Jake that all energy is borrowed and that we must return it one day. Jake appears to understand this, and as he prays for an animal he has just slain, Neytiri tells him that he is ready for a vital rite of passage, bonding with and riding at Declan, a flying mountain banshee. Jake must accompany Neytiri, Sute, and 2 other Navy trainees to the highest section of the Hallelujah Mountains in order to reach the banshee's nesting grounds. Several factors make this a dangerous lesson: the height, the ferocity of the untamed banshees, but Jake's lack of fear and successful bond with his banshee earn him the grudging respect of the Navy warriors present, including Sute. He bonds with the tendrils in his line, and as he rides the flying beast he observes that he isn't much of a horseman, but he was born to do this. Jake, Neytiri, and the others ride together to the Tree of Souls, the Navy's most sacred spot. During a hunting mission, Jake and Neytiri are suddenly pursued and attacked by Torek, a giant and brightly colored flying mountain banshee with murderous intentions towards everything that flies. According to Neytiri, its name means last shadow since, once seen, the Torek's shadow is usually the last shadow one ever gets to see, as its attack is almost always lethal. Back at Home Tree, Neytiri shows Jake the skeleton of a previous Torek. She tells him that the last person to ride a Torek was her grandfather's grandfather, who used the horse to bring the 5 Navi tribes together during a difficult period. Such a person would be known as Torek Mado, or Rider of the Last Shadow. When Jake returns to his human form, it's clear that this latest experience has changed him. As he says, "Out there is the real world, and here is the dream." The Colonel approaches him and informs him that his mission has been completed and that he will return to Earth that day. And, true to his word, the Colonel has made arrangements for Jake to receive the treatment he requires to regain use of his legs. Jake intends to postpone his departure because he believes he is about to be inducted into the tribe and accepted as one of them, at which point he will be able to negotiate with the Navi to relocate. The Colonel agrees. Jake attends a Navi ritual and discovers that the Navi believe that everyone can be born twice. Neytiri takes Jake to the Tree of Voices, a place of worship where they utilize their cues to bond with the tree. Neytiri informs Jake that he can construct a bow out of the tree and that he has the ability to select a woman. Jake informs Neytiri that he has already chosen her, and she responds that she has also chosen him. Jake wakes up in the lab after they sleep together under the tree. Neytiri awakens in the morning to the sound of crashing trees, followed by the presence of bulldozers. As the forest falls around Neytiri, who is dragging and carrying Jake to safety, soldiers advance. Jake is preparing to join with his avatar at their isolated location, and when he finally awakens, he gets aboard one of the bulldozers and attempts to stop it, eventually breaking its camera system and attracting gunfire. Other Navi warriors arrive, and the Colonel, who is watching films back at the base, recognizes Jake in his avatar form as the person who attempted to thwart their mission. The bulldozers continue their work, destroying the precious site. The Navi desire war on Home Tree. Grace and Jake are opposed to it. There is a heated argument. Sute attempts to murder Jake after learning that Jake and Neytiri are bonded for life while he and Neytiri were betrothed. Jake asserts that he is a Navi and thus has the right to speak. Both Grace and Jake's avatars become asleep as the Colonel, who is outraged, breaks the links between them and their human bodies and arrests Jake for attempting to stop the bulldozers. Grace and Jake square off against RDA and military brass. Grace reveals that Pandora's trees form a network with more cerebral connections than the human brain, and that the Navi can access it. As a result, the Omaticaya will never leave Home Tree again. Parker and the Colonel talk about their alternatives. He plans to launch an attack on Home Tree and use gas bombs to drive the Navi away. Jake requests permission to return to the Omaticaya and persuade them to leave, and he is given 1 hour to do so. Jake and Grace are not invited to return. Neytiri rejects Jake. Jake and Grace have both been chained and abandoned by the Omaticaya, who are prepared to attack the humans, who have come in a massive fleet of flying ships. The fleet fires petrol canisters into Home Tree and its environs. As the conflict progresses, the majority of the firepower is directed towards the root structure of Home Tree, which is brought down by a barrage of explosions and heavy artillery. There are several Omaticaya slain. Moat releases Jake and Grace and requests that they save the tribe. When Jake arrives, Neytiri rejects him once more when he tries to console her. Itukin, Neytiri's father, is murdered by a massive piece of shrapnel. His dying request is for Neytiri to carry his sacred bow and lead their people. The destruction appears to be infinite until Jake and Grace return to their human bodies and are swiftly arrested for treason. Norm gets imprisoned as well for attempting to prevent soldiers from disabling their avatar forms. The Navi congregate around the Tree of Souls. Trudy enters the cell containing Jake, Grace, and Norm. She dupes their security by claiming she doesn't want anything to do with them, only to knock out the guard seconds later. The Colonel shoots and wounds Grace as they prepare to depart the base. The team flies Trudy's spacecraft to the isolated facility in the floating mountains, then takes a pod to another location in the forest. Jake regains control of his avatar avatar body. The anticipated reunion with the Omaticaya is not to be. Jake is an outcast, a stranger, so he makes a risky decision. He realizes that in order to regain the Navi's trust, he must take things to the next level. He summons his Banshee and goes in search of Torek. His method is simple, but it can quickly lead to death. Jake believes that the Torek never seeks an attack above himself, thus he can be approached in this manner. Jake leaps from his Banshee to the back of the Torek. He next appears riding the Torek at the Tree of Souls during an Omaticaya ceremony. Jake has formed a strong bond with the Torek. The Omaticaya are astounded to witness the fulfillment of their greatest legend. Jake dismounts and walks past the gathering of Navi, who part before him in awe. When he reaches Neytiri, they both extend their arms to each other, and she says, "I see you." Tsute, the tribe's new leader, accepts Jake's new role as Torek Mato. He holds Jake in high regard. Jake persuades Moat to assist Grace, who is dying. Moat starts the preparations, which include positioning Grace's human and avatar bodies near the Tree of Souls. The plan is to permanently transfer Grace's consciousness to her avatar. Moat informs Grace that she must pass through the Eye of Iwa, and that the Great Mother may choose to let her pass through to her avatar self, or she may choose to keep Grace with her. The ceremony fails, but Grace tells Jake before she dies that she has seen Iwa. Jake, heartbroken and enraged, assumes the form of Torek Mato and declares that it is time to send a message to the Sky People that this is their, the Navi's, country. To accomplish so, they must first approach each of the Navi clans and request that they fight as one. Tsute will be the new Omaticayan clan head and will assist unite other clans to fight alongside them. The human military has noticed an increase in the number of Navi in the area, from a few hundred to 2,000 in a single day. At this pace, the colonel explains to his troops, the Navi will soon number 20,000, and their perimeter will be overwhelmed. Rather than allowing that to happen, he continues, they must launch a preemptive strike while they still have the opportunity. Their plan is to convert a space shuttle into a massive bomb carrier. The Tree of Souls is their goal, and the attack is scheduled for 0600 the following day. They believe that if they destroy the Tree of Souls, the Navi will flee and never return to this area. Jake is hard at work rallying the Omaticaya. He uses his power to join with the Tree of Souls and begs Iwa to investigate Grace's memories, emphasizing that people killed their mother, Earth, the entity that preserves the balance of life. Neytiri appears and informs Jake that Iwa is impartial. Quaritch amasses his fleet, mostly to guard the Valkyrie shuttle. The bomb ship and the Armada are making their way towards the Tree of Souls. The combined Navi force begins to descend from the skies and land. Jake, Tsute, and other warriors engage in combat with military aircraft, mostly Scorpion attack ships. On both sides, casualties are mounting. The gunships have unrivaled firepower, but they are no match for the Declans, who capture them and smash them together. Jake, riding the Torek, is pursued and shot at by Colonel Quaritch's Dragonfly ship. Trudy arrives and opens fire on the Colonel's command ship. Neytiri's Banshee is shot down and killed. Norm's avatar is mortally wounded and he jumps back to his human form. Tsute takes on the bomb ship and is killed in the attempt. Trudy dies when her ship is destroyed in a hail of gunfire from Quaritch's Dragonfly. From the ground, Neytiri observes the action. Jake makes a failed attempt to contact Tsute, as well as an unsuccessful attempt to contact Trudy. Meanwhile, the bomb ship approaches the Tree of Souls. Jake instructs Neytiri to leave the fight through communicator. A battalion of Titanotheres, Pandora's heavily armored dinosaur-like beasts, appears and fights the Earth forces through what remains of the surrounding forest. They easily annihilated infantry and soldiers wearing amp suits. Neytiri rejoins the fight, overjoyed that Iwa has heard Jake's appeal for help, with many other Pandoran species following her. When a Thanator approaches nearby, it bows submissively to her. As the military's ground forces retreat in disarray, Jake and his Torek take to the skies to confront the bomb ship. Jake grenades the bomb ship as he approaches from above. It bursts into flames and explodes far away from the Tree of Souls. Colonel Quaritch dons an amp suit and leaps off the command ship before it explodes in a ball of flames. Grace has put up a makeshift camp for him. Jake is inside his avatar pod at the camp. Quaritch, intent on killing Jake, is immediately assaulted by a Thanator with whom Neytiri had formed a relationship and ridden to the location. The colonel kills the Thanator using his amp suit, trapping Neytiri beneath it. Jake appears in his avatar before the colonel has a chance to assassinate Neytiri. The colonel fights in his amp suit while Jake fights as his avatar, armed simply with a piece of pipe. When Jake smashes the suit's plastic canopy, the colonel pops it off, puts on a breathing mask, and asks Jake how it feels to have betrayed his race before moving off towards the structures that house the pods. "You think you're one of them? Time to wake up," he taunts as he smashes into the mobile lab, searching for Jake's pod and destroys it as well as human Jake. The war continues. Jake is seized by an amp suit arm and dangles from his queue in front of the colonel. Meanwhile, Neytiri has almost escaped. The colonel draws Jake closer to him and pulls out his knife, preparing to slit Jake's throat. Neytiri suddenly fires an arrow at the colonel, impaling him in the center of his chest. The colonel is in shock and unable to continue his assault on Jake. Neytiri's second arrow connects with the first. It knocks the colonel in the amp suit to the ground. However, the lab has suffered significant damage and is now leaking into the planet's poisonous atmosphere. Human Jake is awake but having trouble breathing hiding and putting on a mask. Neytiri appears and assists Jake in putting on his mask. Cradling human Jake, she says, "I see you." It's the first time they've seen each other face to face. Back at Hell's Gate, the majority of the remaining humans are being marched into a shuttle to be returned to Earth. However, a few Earth people, including Norm and Dr. Patel, are invited to stay on Pandora. Jake signs out in his farewell video log, where we learn that he has decided to permanently transfer his consciousness to his avatar. Jake goes through Iwa's eye in a ceremony identical to Grace's. Neytiri watches over him as he awakens in his avatar. Thanks for watching. If you love movies and want to see more, make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our amazing movie recaps. Till then, see you on the next video.